I think when a shooter asks, what's the difference between your products and your competitors? They're probably expecting a simple answer. And as easy as that would be to do, the answer is much deeper than that. In this episode, we cover exactly what that difference might be.
This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast.
Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I am your host, Scott Volquartsen. This week, I wanted to touch on a topic that we get asked a lot of. And whether we're working events, trade shows, even just answering emails or phone calls, a lot of times we'll have our customers say, what's the major difference between ours and our competitors? And as often as we hear that question, it would be great if there was just one go-to thing that we could say, but that would be unfair to actually what is the difference. I recently heard a term that I thought described it very well, and it was used in another podcast called invisible progress. And basically what it was talking about was just the concept that many times it's a small, undetected steps that we take that ultimately end up getting us to our outcome that we're looking for. And this applies to whether we're talking about firearm products. It can even apply to if you're talking about like diet or lifestyle. If you want to make a change, so many times we're always looking for one major thing that we can fix or change, where in reality, it's all the little things that we do, and we do them consistently over time that'll eventually end up creating that big change that we're looking for. And it's this exact same thing with our products. We've been doing this, myself personally, since the mid 90s, my dad well before that. And there's so many things that we have learned over the years that never see the inside of a catalog. They're never going to make copy on our website and probably not even be talked about when we're interacting with our customers because they're so minute. But it's all those little things, maybe add 1% here, 2% here, that eventually gets us to what we're looking for. For example, if we change something in one of our barrels, our triggers, a material, something like that, even a coating, we're going to call that out when we're marketing. But there's so many little things that it'd be impossible to cover in all of our marketing or advertising. Little things that, as crazy as it sounds, when we are deburring and tumbling different parts, it may come down to, instead of running it in one of the particular tumbling machines or centrifugal disc machines, instead of running it 9 minutes, we may run it 8 minutes and 30 seconds. So on the surface, that seems like a very easy change. You just go from 9 to 8:30. But the way we're wired and the way we have to do things is just that subtle change requires us to go back and test the parts, test them thoroughly, make sure we don't have any unintended consequences from that change, and then document it. Is the change for the better? Is it going to open ourselves up to another issue somewhere else that we didn't even think about as we made that change? So it really boils down to a mindset that not only I have, but everybody on our team has, and it's always looking for those little details. Will machining an additional 2,000 radius make a difference? Then we got to test it. Even for our machinists in the shop, the way they load and unload and program the parts and all the equipment, the one thing I talk to a lot of different people about is all the companies have access to the same style of equipment. And unfortunately, or I guess, even though we all have that same access, companies don't turn out the same level of parts. And that can be for a multitude of reasons. That one, you try to squeeze a little more tool life out of an end mill here and there. You get a little quick and you don't take as much time to wipe down a machine before you load a part. You don't double check that measurement of that offset before you proceed to keep running until the next QC check. There's so many little things there that take place that it's hard to even cover in a podcast. But it's one thing that we're really proud of. It's a culture that we've built that everybody that works for us from the ground up has that same mindset of what can we do a little bit different, or what can we add here? What can we subtract here maybe? And ultimately, I feel that it adds up to us providing the best rimfire products on the market. And kind of like the way I started this, it doesn't necessarily point to one thing. It's all those little areas that add up. And as I think about this, our customers I believe they expect that from us. Many of our customers have that same mindset, whether they're practicing or just at the range having fun. They're not taking shortcuts. They don't want us to take shortcuts, even though many times we could get away with some of those things and nobody would ever know. The end consumer or customer, the shooter, may not ever know that part wasn't double checked, or this happened or that happened. And to be honest, there's times when, we're currently running a 6 to 8 month backlog on many of our firearms. It would be easy to say, okay, let's really push here, and we're going to cut a corner here, or we're not going to take the time to test this part here, or let's push the machines a little bit harder, a little bit faster. And you can get by with it for a little while, but eventually you are going to see cracks or chinks in the armor where the parts just aren't coming off the way you expect. And our technicians that assemble everything will notice that. And something that I like to talk about is, once that idea creeps in that you can get away with taking a shortcut here or there, that's a very hard mentality to reverse. Momentum's a real thing. And when everybody is aligned towards a common goal, it works very well. But it's also very easy if we take a shortcut here, nobody's going to notice here. And next thing you know, we don't have the product that we want to put our name on. It's the same reason for years we've had people ask, why don't you build an economy level or entry level, whatever you want to call it, firearm or product? And it's something we've looked at many times. But the way we're wired, we end up not being able to end up at that reduced cost or that entry level price, because we know there's a better way and we want to apply that to everything we do. And exact same thing. Once we make it acceptable that we're going to build an entry level or economy and take a shortcut, where do we draw the line at? Well, this one is a step above. We have to put a little extra effort in. To me, that effort needs to be all the way across the board, all the time, no exceptions. And I'm very proud to say that our team is able to do that. And it's over 45 years of this mentality that makes up the difference that we're looking for. So, like I said, when somebody says, what's the difference? I wish it was one answer. I wish it was, we put this DLC coating on a bolt, or we use these tolerances on our barrel. But like I said, that would be unfair to the overall process and the constant work and research and development and improvement that our team is looking for.
Producer question, Scott. Is there any moments all the way back to your dad, or any products or product evolution, anything that stands out that really embodies this? Obviously, it carries over across our entire product line, but is there anything that really stands out as like, I can't believe we're trying this, or I can't believe we're still tweaking on this and continuing to evolve this part or this process, 45 years later?
I would say one of the parts that stands out the most to me is even something as simple as our 1022 target hammer.
Oh, yeah.
It's one that we've made since the early 90s, and it's gone through more changes than I can count. It started as a cast part that we would have to drill out the cast holes because they couldn't hold the tolerances, and then we would surface grind the notch all the way through the changes we made. For a while, we machined them on one of the machining centers, and now it is being done on a wire EDM machine. But even that, the evolution doesn't stop because we are always playing around with, like I mentioned, if we put, a 1,000th radius here, or if we change this angle a half a degree here, does that give us a little bit better trigger pull, a little more consistent trigger pull? But then from the testing phase, it's not just testing it with our other parts, with our trigger guards. We have to test it in Ruger trigger guards. And even that is not just one trigger guard. They've had their aluminum housing. Now they've gone to their polymer housing. They've changed parts. So, it's not as easy as just dropping the hammer in, running out and putting a couple hundred rounds through it to make sure everything works the way we expect.
Right. So when you say rabbit hole, you do kind of mean rabbit hole. And like you said, it's hard to sometimes put it in perspective, but like making a small change and then you think testing the change is not that big of a deal. But like you touched on, what will that cause any problems down the line? I mean, there can't be a worse feeling than thinking you nailed it and then realizing 10 steps later that change actually affected something that was unforeseen.
Correct. And it's interesting because it would be very easy to just say the trigger pull is pretty good, or it's good enough. It's worked for the last 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
But doing that is the easiest way to let your competitors pass you by. Or even, to me, if you're not constantly pushing the envelope of what's possible, we're doing ourselves a disservice, but more importantly, we are doing our customers a disservice, because they kind of rely on us to know that if they're buying part X from us, that we're using the latest technology to do it. We're doing all the research. They've come to expect that from us.
Definitely.
So the day that we quit doing that, we're doing a disservice to them. And in my opinion, it wouldn't be long after that we would see a decline across the board in not only our sales, but just in our overall quality by losing that mindset of constantly pushing and trying to reach. It'll never happen, but trying to build that perfect firearm.
Right. And I think you touched on it too, is it really is a mindset because, as you said, everybody essentially has access to the same pieces of machinery, same equipment, same tooling. It's the individuals behind the machines and the mindset and the processes that are embodied into them to see everything through at the top level.
Correct. And I give a lot of credit to our team on that because, it's a culture that we want to build, but many times it has to come from within for that person.
Yep,
because we're not going to micromanage and watch every single step along the way. They have to have that willingness to want to be able to know that they're producing the best possible part, the best firearm that they can possibly do.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's not something you can teach.
No, and and once you get in that mindset, to me, it starts to create, you actually start to see opportunities that may have not been there. If you don't have that willingness to look and accept that you may need to change the part, then people just start building the exact same part every day, day after day. But when they know there's an opportunity to improve it, and they're constantly looking for that.
Yeah, I think it basically prevents tunnel vision almost inadvertently because you're constantly, like you said, seeking if we maybe change this angle slightly, or if we do this or that, it could completely change how effective that part is.
Exactly. And it's, in my opinion, obviously the technology's improved drastically since when my dad started. But and back then, to me, there was a lot more secrets that companies and manufacturers had.
Yeah.
But now, with the technology and equipment that's out there, everything can be reverse engineered.
Right. I think probably back then it was more because it was so customized and so much, almost an art form, that if you kind of had your way, you didn't want to share that because it maybe wasn't replicable at the time.
Exactly. And there's still some things that we do with, certain polishing or processes that we don't share that.
Yeah, it's not in our marketing.
Correct.
Yeah.
But for the bulk of it, like you said, you can buy the same equipment. You can, buy the same software that runs the equipment. But then there is, even, I'll give you a perfect example is when it comes to fluting barrels. There are much faster ways to flute barrels than what we do. But every time there's always a fine line of how hard can you push it before you see a diminishing return in the quality of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And it gets tough when you're, like I mentioned earlier, when you're 6 to 8 months behind, you're always trying to find that edge where you can
expedite,
cut down on some lead times. But you have to be very careful not to step over that edge and start to, run into a bunch of problems.
Yeah, there's a fine line between like expediting and keeping quality right where it needs to be.
Yes.
Or what's expected from our customers.
Yeah. And, and sometimes you do have to push over that edge to find out where that edge is.
And then come back a little bit.
And then come back, but at least you tried.
Exactly.
And in many ways, it's kind of to me, it keeps it fun.
Yeah, it keeps a certain level of excitement there. Because like you said, things don't always go as planned.
No, and it also allows you to keep learning because sometimes you'll make a change. The change won't work, but it'll lead to something else that you're like, what if we do this? And in a roundabout way, in an indirect way, you end up with a better product in the long run.
Right. Because I don't know if you've mentioned this, there are times when you look to adjust a part and you actually end up adjusting a different part rather than the one you started with because of that process.
Yes. And that's where we always welcome feedback from all of our customers, because as much as we try, as often as we test and everything, it's impossible to duplicate every scenario that our customers are going to put it through.
Definitely.
So when a customer emails and says, hey, I'm seeing this, or have you thought about this? It'd be foolish on our part not to look at that from a neutral point of view and just say, do they have a legitimate, point here that we need to look at, or maybe they don't fully understand the way it's supposed to work or something like that. But a lot of times they'll mention something and we may not make that exact change, but once again, it'll lead to a trickle down effect where we change something else to get to what they're looking for.
Right. I think that's one great thing that we maybe don't talk about enough is we really do look at almost every piece of feedback that comes in. And we do, and I know you even personally look at most of that and decide, do we want to look at this closer? Do we make a change? Do we test something? It's something we probably don't talk about enough, but we definitely look at every piece of feedback that comes in.
Well, and for me personally, it allows me to kind of keep a pulse on what we're doing and what our customers are saying. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this before. I think we've talked about it on the podcast, but if all we want to look at is the positive feedback that comes in,
yep,
to me, you're never going to evolve by doing that. Yes, it's great and it makes you feel good temporarily, but many times it's the constructive criticism that you receive from a customer, whether it be on something along the customer experience, a product itself, or even a product suggestion. That's what kind of keeps moving the needle and keeps pushing everything forward.
Well, it keeps that excitement up, like you touched on earlier.
Yeah. And, and even like, if we still, back to your earlier question, if we still made the 1022 target hammer the way Dad initially came out with it, it would probably still work.
Yeah.
but it's just not the best way to try and do it.
Yeah, it had a natural evolution.
Yes. And there's countless parts that I could point to like that have started one place and morphed into something completely different or unexpected from where we originally started.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that's that could even maybe be a whole nother podcast.
Yes.
But speaking of the podcast, we're kind of getting back on schedule after a couple weeks. What do we have coming up?
We have some exciting guests coming up over the next couple weeks. We have first we'll have Ryan and Di Muller come on. We're going to discuss all things 2A and better ways to put that message out. We will follow that up with an interview that I'm really excited about and one that I've been trying to get to happen for a long time, and that's with Omar Crispy Avila. And he's got a new book coming out, which is pretty cool.
That's going to be great. Yep.
And looking forward to that and talking to him about what led to his decision to write the book, and then just dive into how he stays so positive with everything that he's been through.
Yeah, his story is incredible. That's going to be a really good one to tune into.
Yeah, and then we're going to follow that up. We're going to have Tony Blauer on, who, for those that don't know, he's the man behind the Spear system. He's been working in the self-defense world for probably, I think it's over 40 years now. He's got a very interesting approach to it. He is kind of a go-to source for many people when it comes to this part of it, whether it be, just situational awareness, controlling your fear, and how to respond when you're under that adrenaline rush. So I think everybody will enjoy that one too. And he's a wealth of knowledge. I've heard him on other podcasts. I've had the opportunity to meet him a couple different times. So another one that I'm really looking forward to.
That's going to be great. So like I said, I think over the next few weeks here, we're going to have some pretty exciting podcasts with a ton of value for the listeners here.
Yeah. And like you said, we're kind of back on schedule now. We had some things happen. Sometimes life happens and we had to postpone a couple weeks, but
yeah, it's been busy.
It's been busy and it's been fun. And, we got busy fall coming up.
Yeah. And we're back at it. Where can people reach out to us if they have comments, questions, suggestions?
Best place to find us is at podcast@volquartsen.com. And you can just email us there. And if it's a question you just want responded to, we can do that. If it's something you want us to address on the podcast, we'll do that. Sometimes it may seem like a simple question, but there's a lot more than what somebody would expect is behind that particular question.
Definitely. So yeah, lots of good stuff coming up. We encourage you to tune in.
And as always, thank you guys for listening, and we'll be back next week.